and the conditions that persist within those four walls. Mandela's own 27 years in prison, much of it on Robben Island, transformed the prison into a political archive of anti-colonial and anti-racist resistance. In this sense, the history of political prisoners is inseparable from the history of liberation movements across the world. In Ireland, Bobby Sands and the 1981 Hunger Strikers fought not merely for better prison conditions, but for the recognition that they were political prisoners and not common criminals. Their insistence on political status reflected a larger struggle over legitimacy. Who has the authority to define resistance as a crime? In South Africa, Mandela and countless anti-apartheid activists were imprisoned precisely because they challenged the racial sovereignty of the apartheid state. And in Palestine, the question of political prisoners remains central to the ongoing struggle against occupation. The extensive use of administrative detention, prolonged incarceration, solitary confinement, the imprisonment of political leaders, students, journalists, and even children has made the jail one of the defining institutions of the Palestinian experience under occupation. This reminds us that the political prisoner is not simply a domestic legal issue. Rather, it is a recurring feature of regimes confronted by movements for justice, equality, and self-determination. The Indian context exists within this broader history. During the anti-colonial struggle, Bhagat Singh and others insisted on being recognized as political prisoners because their incarceration rose from ideological conviction and collective struggle rather than criminal conduct. This distinction remains vital. Post-independence India inherited not only the physical architecture of the British prison, but also the of exceptionalism. The repression of communist and peasant movements to the repression following Naxalbari, from the emergency to the use of draconian laws including NSA, TADA, sedition law, and now UAPA. Incarceration has repeatedly functioned as an instrument of political discipline. Every phase, every era has produced its resistance and its brand of political prisoners. In contemporary India, the category of the political prisoner acquires renewed urgency. The incarceration of academics, journalists, students, human rights defenders, Dalit intellectuals, Adivasi organizers, and Muslim activists is in India, which the introduction to this book characterizes as a period marked by the dynamics of fascism of the 21st century. Umar Khalid succinctly describes this as the cocktail of Manuvad and market. Umar Khalid's PhD thesis, which I really request friends to find a copy and read, it's called The Contesting Claims and Contingencies of Rule, Singhbhum 1800-2000, is instructive in understanding the challenges faced by Adivasis right from colonial rule to present-day neoliberal globalization. Even today, the resistance of Adivasi communities is viewed as a threat, which the state persecutes and silences through state repression and the criminalization of democratic protest. Being Muslim is sufficient for an increasingly egregious assault by Hindutva organizations and the state itself. Since 2014, we have repeatedly witnessed the troubling use of ordinary criminal law as an instrument of social targeting, where the process itself becomes a form of punishment for many Muslims. As Ashfaq Paikar notes in an essay in this book, Umar's politics and identity are perceived as a threat to this government. He is not the kind of citizen, Muslim or student, this current dispensation could be comfortable with. Unapologetic about his Muslim identity, he has been a left activist who started engaging with political issues during the Batla House encounter. Whether it is Bhima Koregaon or the anti-CA protests or Adivasi struggles, UAPA, that's the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, has become the toolkit to imprison dissenters. UAPA stands as one of the most enduring remnants of colonial rule. Under the British, laws of this nature existed for one purpose alone, to criminalize resistance and imprison those who dared to speak against the colonizer. It is a matter of profound shame that more than 75 years later, in a republic that claims fidelity to liberty, constitutional morality, and democratic dissent, the state continues to preserve and weaponize the very architecture of repression once used by our oppressors. UAP is characterized by vague allegations sufficing for registration of cases, prolonged pre-trial incarceration. Bail is made extraordinarily difficult, which allows courts to deny bail if the allegations appear prima facie on the prosecution's version alone. 3 UAPA detainees, Father Stan Swami from among the BK-16, Pandu Norote, who was co-accused with Sai Baba, and the student activist Kanchan Nanaware died in detention due to the medical negligence, which the editors note in this book in their introduction, and they make this point that the prison conditions make it lethal for political prisoners. This is where Kafka's The Trial becomes an uncannily relevant framework. Prolonged incarceration without trial, repeated denial of bail, and the use of vague and expansive legal categories convert procedure into coercion. The process becomes the punishment. Draconian laws and an increasingly pliant judiciary have served as the regime's best friends in executing its political vendetta. Given that the cases that have been foisted have scant or false evidence and will all probability not withstand legal scrutiny, the rule book of the state has been to make the process the punishment. This we have seen in the case of Umar Khalid, where the Supreme Court itself abdicates its duty to protect civil liberties. It held that prolonged incarceration is not the sole determinant in granting bail, while devising a dubious theory of distinguishing Umar Khalid and Sharjeel Imam's role as masterminds as opposed to the others who were called local level facilitators. Here one must remember Babasaheb Ambedkar's conception of constitutional morality. It actually becomes indispensable. Ambedkar insisted that democracy cannot survive merely as an institutional arrangement. It requires a public ethic grounded in liberty, equality, fraternity, and what he called the public conscience. They will try to erase our public conscience by imprisoning our best, but we must not let them. When dissent itself is criminalized, when critique is interpreted as conspiracy, when protest is recast as terrorism, we are compelled to ask whether constitutional morality itself is under siege. The question of political prisoners is therefore at its core a constitutional question, since a democracy, secure in itself, does not fear dissent. So when a state increasingly turns to prison as a response to critique, it reveals not strength but a crisis of its legitimacy. So why was Umar Khalid imprisoned after all? Bobby Sands, the Irish revolutionary, once said, one of my favorite quotes, "Our revenge will be the laughter of our children." One always goes back to this statement, a slogan of defiance for sure, but also a deeply philosophical and political understanding of dissent and resistance. The political prisoner does not endure incarceration only as an individual. The struggle is directed towards a future beyond the prison walls, towards a society in which freedom, dignity, and justice are no longer criminalized. A brighter future will emerge from the resistance of Umar Khalid and so many others. No struggle goes in vain. On 5th of January 2026, the Supreme Court denied bail to Umar and Sharjeel Imam while granting bail to Gulfisha and others. At that time, Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia made this statement. He said, "As a citizen, and like many other people, I too had hoped that they would get bail. I could not see much of a difference between those who got bail and those who did not." Umar Khalid, after this bail rejection, writes, "But what I really want those who express solidarity with me to understand is that I reject the victimhood that I have often identified with by others. There is pain in this seemingly endless wait indeed, but there is also beauty in this pain. I am content where I am, in spite of what I am being subjected to, because there's beauty in knowing that this is not about me alone. My incarceration is not merely to target me as an individual, it is to teach my fellow comrades a lesson that anyone who dares to ask uncomfortable questions to the powers that can be and will be forcibly silenced without respite. Therefore, this battle that I'm fighting to is larger than me as an individual. That is why the language in which those who believe in what I have to say speak of me and others in this case needs to change. Ours is a battle for a vision of a time in our society when some will not be more equal than others. The conviction in what makes this pain bearable, it's almost Christ-like or Bhagat Singh-like. Both sacrifice their life for causes of the oppressed, and there is a beauty in knowing that there is a lineage of which I am a part in a history that shall be penned for the future. That is why I wake up every day to the lines of Bhagat Singh that I have etched on my prison wall. Every tiny molecule of ash is in motion with my heart. I am such a lunatic that I am free even in jail." Thank you. I now invite the three editors who put the book together to please come to the stage. Shuddha, Anirban, and Banu. Thank you.
Hello, friends. You people are so punctual. In Delhi, the program wouldn't have started by now, but uh, last time I came to Bangalore, I was Umar's bodyguard. So twice I came. Once he was going to speak in St. Joseph's College, and also for 1 year commemoration of Gauri Lankesh. We had come. Those were the two occasions why I had come to Bangalore. I've always loved the spirit of the city, and every time, because I've come for programs like this, we've seen the spirit, the solidarity every time from the city, and this time we're really looking forward. And after Delhi, this book is therefore being launched in Bangalore, and we all three of us are really glad that we have come here with the book. This book is an act of friendship. It's a product of an act of friendship and solidarity. It started because the concept of the book was when we wanted to compile the articles that Umar Khalid has written from jail. 9 articles in total written from jail. But then we thought that there are articles that are written on him by others, and other prisoners who have written, other friends and families who have also written. So finally the book became a compilation of the product of the time that these last 6 years were, and it became finally Umar Khalid and his world. The world of which all of us are a part. The world that starts from his prison cell but doesn't end there. It's the world that goes beyond. And all of us who are fighting for justice, for our constitution, for liberty, for equality, we all are a part of that world. And in the last 6 years, how that world has evolved, how that world has shaped him, and how that world has shaped all of us. This is what we tried to capture in this book. So 337 pages, 64 authors, 12 articles by Umar, 9 of which are written from prison. And all of us, that our reflections, this is what this book is. I just hope that you all will read and let us know what you feel about it. We were told that we just have to read a few sections from the book itself, and then the main discussion will be done by the panel. Thankfully, we don't have to discuss. So, should we go with the reading? Should we go ahead with the reading? Okay. So, should I start? Okay. So Shuddha will start the reading and then we'll take up.
Sorry, I'm coming here because I have it on a piece of paper, so it kind of makes sense. Where do we start? Thank you, Bangalore, for turning out in such wonderful ways, being here. I was earlier this afternoon at the Alternative Law Forum office with Arvind, met Clifton, and a lot of old memories of my association with ALF and with this city were reawakened very beautifully. Thank you. So where do we start? We must begin with acknowledging, as Bunadosna said, the times we breathe in, times that reek of being the theater of the absurd, when lies masquerade as history, when genocide passes as self-defense, and legality becomes only a tool to subvert justice. It has been almost 6 years and a little bit longer, almost 6.5 years, that peaceful anti-CAA protesters have been behind bars. The first wave of arrests began in March 2020, and then Umar was arrested on the 13th of September 2020. There's some serendipity to that. Not many people know that the day the Delhi police arrested him, 13 September, happens to be National Political Prisoners Day. and has been observed as such since colonial times, when one political prisoner unfortunately passed away due to a prolonged hunger strike, something like Bobby Sands. We acknowledge every waking hour that freedom has eluded the quest for justice of all these individuals and many others, like the Bhima Koregaon 16 and others who have suffered in incarceration during this time. We must acknowledge, as editors of this book, the public prosecutor for maintaining a straight face while arguing one of the most untenable cases, wherein he interpreted silences and whispers, wherein he criminalized democratic dialogue and blurred the lines between terrorist and political activity. We must remember the trial has not started yet. It's been 6 years, no trial. All that we have by way of the arguments of the prosecutors are arguments made in relation to the application, the petition for bail. So there's a bail hearing. There are several bail hearings that have happened across the judicial system, starting from the district court, the high court, then the Supreme Court twice, and now a review petition had been filed and was also summarily dismissed. So over these 6 years, there's been a long judicial process, which is not a trial. It's something in the nature of a witch hunt. That being the context, now we must acknowledge the many pieces of the mosaic that come together to make this book. Bunajyotsna has already given you a sort of statistical profile. 64 authors, 89 articles, 12 articles by Umar, 9 from jail, etc. We acknowledge the authors of all the pieces, some of whom are here, and we will hear from them in the next panel. Prakash Raj, Janki Nair, Ramachandra Guha. Wonderful to have you with us. Apart from illustrating the many moving parts of Umar's world, his dilemmas and convictions, the pieces also serve as a testament to this time, to the audacity of the truth tellers, and I must say the timidity of this regime. This regime is made up of cowards, and that is why Umar Khalid is in prison, because they're really scared of who he would be if he were a free man, and how people would respond to him. Thank you. While a few of the articles of this collection are hitherto unpublished, the rest were written at different junctures and mark the many milestones of this decade of protest. We express our gratitude to the original publishers of these pieces and thank them for giving the permission to reproduce them here. So they're the Caravan, the Wire, the Telegraph, the Print, Intercept, Economic and Political Weekly, Midday, HuffPost, Outlook India, the Quint, Scroll, and Article 14. Also the India Love Project and Constitutional Law and Philosophy. So you get a sense of the very wide spectrum of platforms in which this matter has found life. We must also acknowledge all those who have over the years been tearing into the banality of the state's arguments. The legal team, Tridip Pais, Sania Kumar, Rakshanda Deka, Sahil Khurana, Kapil Sibbal, Chandaruday Singh, for being Umar's voice in the many courtrooms and in the many cycles of this case as we traverse back and forth from Sessions Court to the Supreme Court, back to the Sessions Court, back to the Supreme Court. Some of this happened during COVID, so it used to happen in what were called online proceedings, and I was a diligent sort of watcher of these proceedings. Finally, we both acknowledge and express our solidarity towards Umar's family, particularly his parents, Mr. SQR Elias and Sabiha Begum, for being resolute in the face of repeated denials of justice. We acknowledge both their silent tears and their resolute voice, and of Umar's sisters that refuse to tremble in the face of the powers that be. So there are countless voices, untold sighs, 1,000 prayers, and innumerable well-wishers of Umar whom it is impossible to acknowledge except in spirit. The book, in fact, is an attempt to reach out to them and also expand the circle so as to engage as many of them in our conversations. That's why we have so many copies of the book outside, so that each of you can take one home, share it with your friends, with your family, so that this circle keeps expanding. As Bunajyotsna said, the book is a testament of friendship. By holding it in your hands, by reading it, by purchasing, borrowing, or stealing it, for yourself or for a friend, you're currently enlarging the circle of associates of a thoughtful young man held hostage, captive, prisoner since 13 September 2020. That man is Dr. Umar Khalid. He's a historian, a prisoner of conscience, and under trial, a friend, a beloved, a brother, a son, a comrade. He's a very argumentative Indian who loves cricket, bad puns, children, Italian food, and nothing more than to talk late into the night about anything and everything. Those of us, we are his friends, and we sometimes have said, "Bas karo yaar, Umar." You know, I mean, he talks, and he has this hunger for conversation, and now we miss it, but anyway. He sings off-tune, but hums. He dances badly, but dances. He reads murder mysteries. There's a wonderful list of his latest reading outside, which is quite instructive. And once dreamt of being a national-level cricket player. He gets carried away when he speaks sometimes. He has a low staccato voice that listens before it speaks. He's our friend, and now he's waiting for you to read this book, become his friend, his advocate, each one of you. Since he was arrested for almost the entirety of the past several years, Umar Khalid has had no control over his time, no liberty of movement and action, except for brief 7-day or week, 10 days long spells of highly conditional bail in order to be able to attend weddings and family functions. And he has been unable to freely associate with his friends, comrades, and well-wishers. He has not been able to pursue either his scholarly research nor been able to take up gainful employment. He has been a captive in body, though not in spirit. Through cold wave, heat wave, monsoon, autumn, spring, or summer, Umar remains in prison still awaiting trial. He was arrested, and I want to say this categorically, on entirely false charges because he spoke the truth and called out a discriminatory, unconstitutional amendment to the Indian citizenship laws for being what it was. These conditions are dispiriting, not just to Umar, but also to many of us. And yet each time we meet Umar, he urges us not to lose hope, to keep our spirits high, and to let him know what is happening in the big world outside the gates of Tihar prison. It is partly to live up to those expectations that Umar has of us, of not giving up, that we, 3 friends of Umar, are putting this book together. It gives shape and form to many of the conversations that we have with Umar and between ourselves, and to some of the conversations that we cannot have with him. Because we always meet him on one end of an old-fashioned telephone across the shut, greased glass window in the mulaqat room of jail number 2 in Tihar. Partly, this book also emerges from our habit of gathering books for Umar to read while he is inside. Because the one thing he has more than us is time. Partly, it is also to see his incarceration as a lens through which we attempt to understand the time that we're all living through, marked by the dynamic of a fascism of the 21st century with distinctly Indian characteristics. So what do we mean by this fascism of the 21st century? Umar and others like him are in prison primarily because they directly challenge the project of a populist, xenophobic, right-wing, culturally majoritarian, authoritarian, statist disruption of democracy that seeks to foreclose and inhibit an inclusive, open, secular space for an evolving dialogue about the future of Indian society. This contest between 2 visions of the future is central to the long process of churning that is currently underway in India. The fate of Umar Khalid is a detail in the mosaic of this reality. On one side are the champions of Hindu supremacy that need even citizenship to be qualified by an implicit hierarchy of religious identities with Hindus on top. This is a decadent but brutally powerful social phenomenon backed by corporate patronage that seeks to wield disparate social groups under an overarching Hindu umbrella. It is not without its internal contradictions, but its claim to consensus is often bolstered by a pliant media and commentariat that homogenizes everything under its radar. It is propped up by an elaborate network of social contact and shared privileges, and finds its energy through a magnification of hatred and negativity that allows some of even the poor and the deprived amongst the majority it seeks to harness to experience momentary surges of dominance over even more marginal and minority communities. It worships the state, the machismo of leaders, weapons, and is always on the lookout for fights, for skirmishes, for victims. And yet, it plays the victim when it suits it. I think you see a little bit of that spectacle outside on the road. It plays the victim when it suits it, performing a charade of the abject Hindu, biding his time to take revenge for fantasies of historic persecution. It is the little man playing at the big bully, pretending to be the little man. This, we could say, is a portrait of 21st century fascism with Indian characteristics. Opposing this formation are the partisans of the vision of the future that is open, democratic, has space for everyone, including minorities of all kinds. Here, by space, what is meant is that minorities, be they of religion, caste, ethnicity, language, gender, or sexuality, find room to build a capacity to express themselves and flourish in non-repressive, non-sectarian ways. In the specifically Muslim context, it meant something remarkable, and we need to note it. The weakening of the hegemony of a traditional, clerical, sometimes misogynist, patriarchal formation, including by those who have been patronized by the so-called secular political parties in order to cultivate what they thought was a Muslim vote bank, and the open assertion of power and confidence by young, educated, articulate, subaltern Muslim women. Shaheen Bagh brought this Muslim woman, relegated otherwise to the margins of society, politics, and culture, especially in North India, to the center stage. And although Umar is undoubtedly a man, it was these women and their grandmothers whom he was listening to. The Shaheen Bagh moment seemed to be able to wrest the narrative, even momentarily, away from the continuing identitarian reworking of politics, society, and culture that Hindutva proposes. Instead, for the first time in several decades, that narrative seemed to be upstaged by the reiteration of a citizen-centered insistence on the constitutional values of liberty, equality, and fraternity that Dr. Ambedkar had foregrounded. The Shaheen Bagh moment may have faced a momentary lull when anti-Muslim pogroms precipitated an orgy of violence in February 2020, triggered, in fact, by direct challenge from informal stormtroopers of Hindutva to the continued sit-in of Muslim women and their allies in different parts of Delhi. And it's an irony that the people who did that whole Goli Maro Saloko kind of speech-making, people like Yati Narsimhanand Saraswati, a character whom I think you don't know too well here, but we know him well in North India, where he directly called for, and the Hindi word he used was Jan Sanhar, we need genocide. These are open calls for genocide that were made on the streets of Delhi. This particular one was in Jantar Mantar shortly after the sit-in at Shaheen Bagh started. In 2020, the year that Khalid was arrested under UAPA, 1,321 people, including 5 juveniles, were also arrested under UAPA. In 2021, 814 more people were arrested under UAPA. UAPA arrests in 2022 amounted to 1,005 individuals. Exact figures for the total number of people arrested under UAPA in 2023 and 2024 are not yet publicly available. There's this National Crime Records Bureau website that actually lists people under different sections. They've not yet updated 23, 24, 25. But they're likely to be substantial. Going by these numbers, between 2020 and 2020 alone, 3,140 individuals were arrested under UAPA, which translates to nearly 1,046 per year, or nearly 3 people per day. Apart from several, such as Khalid Saifi, Miran Haider, Gulfasha Fatma, and Sharjeel Imam, all of whom, like Umar Khalid, were arrested under false UAPA charges of a conspiracy to realize violence in February 2020 in Delhi, in the infamous FIR 59, that's the case that all these people are are categorized under. And apart from Khalid Saifi and Sharjeel Imam and Omar and a couple of other people, all the others have now been released on bail as of January this year. So who are they? They also include the Bhima Koregaon 16, journalists, activists, teachers, lawyers, artists, and a Jesuit priest. Arvind Clifton already spoke about the 3 people who actually passed away during this period, which means that, prison had lethal consequences. G.N. Sai Baba also succumbed to failing health, which was disallowed proper treatment in jail despite him living with 90% disability. He passed away shortly after he was released. Among the thousands arrested between 2020 and 2024, this is when Omar is arrested, were a miner attending a funeral march, a geography professor who once had supervised a quarantine center at the height of COVID-19, 7 students celebrating after the telecast of a cricket match, an activist who was filmed discussing Mahatma Gandhi's principles of ahimsa days before deadly riots that authorities said he had a hand in took place. They also include 16 journalists picked up for doing their job. The number of people on whom UAPA charges have been applied overlap with some, but do not include many others arrested under the now lapsed but replaced by much tougher law charge of sedition, wounding religious sentiments and feelings, often used to target those who are victims of majoritarian aggression, disturbing the peace or public order, and damage or threatening to damage public property, all of which have been used to harass dissenters and activists on different occasions. And the situation is such that, following from what Arvind Narayan has actually eloquently written, we could really argue that we are living under conditions of what Arvind has called an undeclared emergency. If one combines the unnaturally high rates of incarceration of political prisoners through preventive detention laws, the willingness to use brutal force to contain every protest in the name of law and order. We've just seen it happen again in Noida, where workers protesting for a rise in their minimum wage were beaten brutally. And again, some 7 people have been arrested. There are actually many more have been arrested. 7 is what we know the names of. And the harassment of political opponents, the use of surveillance by infiltrating software into devices and so on, and the use of the ED and CBI, and the persistent cultivation of a cult of personality of the supreme leader, including giving airtime to his claim of quasi-divine, non-biological status, means that the merely undeclared nature of this emergency cannot conceal its true nature. And what is even more worrying is the fact that we are living in a media universe where these realities are normalized. It's as if it's business as usual. It's not normal. We are not living in a normal time. The Code of Criminal Procedure was decolonized recently to give way to something called Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita, and it has instituted even more repressive conditions. So the charge of sedition has been replaced in word, but in substance it's now become even a thought crime, because people can be picked up on suspicion of feelings that they harbor, no evidence required, right? So the feelings can be investigated later under the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita. Umar Khalid is too young a man to be offered a fest shift, and we were very clear this is not a fest shift. He has his life's work ahead of him. Maybe he will get a fest shift one day. And we know that because of his life's work, the attempt to create a just, equal, diverse, peaceful, and open society in this part of the world, where majorities and minorities of all kinds can live in freedom and with dignities and ambition we share. And crucial in this is the idea that citizenship is a work in progress. And this was the clear lesson of Shaheen Bagh. Citizenship is not something that is frozen on a particular date when you either came this side or that side of a border. Citizenship is something you create by your participation in society as a citizen. And that's the future that I hope that all of you sitting here share with us. Umar Khalid is not alone in prison. We want him to come out so that there's a future apart from the fest shift in which he can still play cricket and write history, including of this difficult time. There are many others like him who are still in prison or who have spent long periods of time in prison. 2 years ago, on the second anniversary of Umar's arrest, I had written at the end of a text that attempts to be a short manual for prison visits, and it's in this book, the following. If you have a friend in prison because they refuse to acquiesce to the bitter denial of freedom and dignity in the country that is currently underway, please go and see them. Make it a part of your routine. Don't put it off till some other time. The time that is passing will never return. They need you now, and you need them. Don't let them feel that they're uncared for, forgotten. They're the keepers of all our consciences. And that is why we have this book before you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuddha. How much time do we have, Arvind, now? Okay. We'll try to... so I will read a piece from the book. It's a conversation that I had with Umar Khalid, with Umar. It's called A Conversation with Umar Khalid That Burned Me. The time allotted for the weekly video call in Tihar Central Jail is just 15 minutes. And you don't talk about the weather with such time constraints, or do you? How about when the country's north is entrapped in a heat wave that has started to hunt lives, when the dry, deforested, deserted planet and its toxified climate are hitting back at us with one of the most morbid and cruel heat waves, then weather does become a pertinent issue of conversation, even concern. I inquired about the heat situation inside the prison from Umar with the same helplessness and apprehension as I had inquired about the COVID situation 2 years ago. He grinned as usual. I've never faced anything like this, he said, almost chuckling. His grin becomes intolerable in such situations. I get angry and he seems to enjoy that. No, seriously, this is my 4th summer in prison. This was written 2 years back. This is my 4th summer in prison, but the heat this time is unbearable. I have never witnessed anything like this in my life. In fact, older inmates say they haven't ever experienced such heat wave, he said. That is the prison conditions of Tihar in Delhi and the heat wave that is severely affecting young and old inmates. The convicts, the under trials, the implicated or the falsely accused are all languishing right now in the heat along with their unfreedom. It's the same cruel condition that is slowly burning lives within prison walls. Umar continued, since our cells are open in the front with bars, waves of hot wind keep whiplashing inside. We try to put up sheets, cover the bars, but that's hardly a cover. And you expect the heat in the daytime, but at night, when the weather doesn't change even after sundown, it almost feels like a betrayal. And he grinned again. The ceiling is so high that the fan almost has a perfunctory presence, and they don't allow us to use coolers. They let us use blankets and quilts in winter, but no coolers in summer, not even in this heat. But then the great Indian jugaad happens. I keep sprinkling water on the sheet that hangs on the bars, on my bed, on the floor, literally everywhere. My chakki, that is the cell, often becomes wet and muddy. But the water dries up quickly, much quicker than you can imagine. But this water therapy, sometimes runs dry when there's a water crisis. He casually added. I now treat the most uncomfortable part of the conversation. Are people falling sick? Yes, he said. People around me are falling sick. They are suffering from various ailments, especially the older people. In fact, one person also died, an old man. He dropped dead, possibly because of the heat. I'm not sure, no one is, but everyone suspects it's the heat that killed him. I can feel my anxiety rising, but I try to calm down. Are you all right? Do you feel any discomfort? I was feeling cramps in my legs yesterday. All of us are drowsy throughout the day because we hardly get any sleep these days. That's all for now, he said calmly. Umar, please keep drinking plenty of water, but also go to the OPD and tell the doctor about the cramps. Your sodium-potassium level might have got imbalanced. I try to hide my panic and my anger and my frustration and my helplessness. Yet again, you need to see a doctor and also get on record your discomforts. This heat indeed is unprecedented, I said. I had read on the news that bats are dropping dead from trees. Yes, earlier there used to be a lot of birds that came to our prison premises. The early mornings were filled with their chirpings. Birds hardly come these days since the heat wave started. I wonder what has happened to them, he said.
Thanks, Bruno. I will read a few excerpts from two of the pieces in this book, dealing with largely the idea of time. Now, in a certain sense, how does one make sense of time? Like, it's been nearly 6 years for Umar and Sharjeel. Even the ones who got bail, like Gulfisha, got bail after 5 years. 5 years, 6 years, these are enormous stretches of time. Now, of course, we have a different pace of time. Those who inside have a completely different pace. How do they make sense of time? And that is where the book serves a purpose. They make sense of time, the time that they are doing. If it only makes sense to them, not just Umar, but Sharjeel and several others who are still behind bars, not just in this case, but also the one left behind in BK16, they make sense of time only if they live on in our conversations. And this book is an effort towards that, such that the conversations keep happening. And I think the fact that we are all gathered here is in itself, and that the fact that we are talking, we are listening, is in itself I think, to a certain extent, the success of this book. And they live through these conversations. There are, of course, those who do not want these conversations happen. We saw some of them outside. We are really glad that BIC, PUCL, both of Karnataka and ILAJ materialized this, despite all the troubles they had to go through. In fact, a few days back, I was speaking with Arvind, and he said that something that comes out really clearly in this book is the fact that amongst everything else, Umar and his likes are behind bars precisely because of their identity, their Muslim identity. And in a certain sense, he said that this book bears his name, and we cannot not have, by any means, we cannot not have this conversation, because we cannot let them win again. And I'm really glad, and we are all really glad that this event could materialize. About time, I'll first read a couple of paragraphs written by me and my partner Ashwati. In fact, just a month after Umar's arrest. I'll just read 2 paragraphs where we write that, "Dear Umar, we are aware that any letter written to you will be pried into by several pairs of eyes. But then there is nothing that we can't talk about that isn't fit to be shared by other people. Hence this open letter. The gatekeepers are welcome to join. We only hope this reaches you in due time. Time. You are probably settling into a parallel routine of time, a slow and sluggish one. It has already been more than a month. It was written in October 2020. As we think about you, we realize that the phrase doing time is very unsettling. Even after all the reformatory thinking that has gone into the idea of prisons in the last century or so, this appears to be the piteous expression of what one effectively does in jail. One does time after all. However, it's not so much the length of time that irks us, at least not yet. But that is because this is a witch hunt that had been unfolding for some time now. We all knew that this was coming. Now, like I mentioned, this is written a month after. And there is another piece that I tried to put together. It's in the section called Mulaqat. and it has several people who have written. In fact, Shuddha also wrote read from this section on Mulaqat. And this is 4 years down the line. It is the arid sameness of the desert that makes it difficult to navigate for a lost traveler. There is no reference point. It's the same for the people who have been in jail for a while. One loses precision in pinpointing time. That's what my friend Umar Khalid said during one of our jail mulaqats. It has been almost 4 years since he was put behind bars. When I thought about it on my way back from Tihar, I could sense more clearly what he meant. How do we refer to time? We say the day before we met last week, or the week after she moved to Hyderabad. That's how we make timelines. We have different timelines with different sets of people, with family, with office colleagues, with college friends. We all operate in different timelines. We have many points of reference to orient our lives as they are in constant motion. But in jail, Umar said, after a point, time becomes a lump, a blur. That's what the jail's routine, monotony, and listlessness does. So when one of the inmates returned after his 2-week parole, Umar ended up asking, how come you're back? It has hardly been a week. In jail, one starts to develop a different relation with time. The measure of time is no longer days, not even weeks or months. Instead, Umar often refers to seasons. Last winter, I wanted to only read fiction. He would say, or this summer is worse in terms of heat, like we heard. In 2020, when he was sent behind bars, my biggest concern was his restlessness. We knew him as someone whose association with time was from minute to minute. He always had plans. Let's meet with him. Let's talk about that. Be it an atrocity on Dalits in Tamil Nadu or a case of harassment in the name of love jihad, an Islamophobic comment in Europe or a sanitation workers' strike on campus, we knew him as someone who wanted to speak up about every indignation. Often there wouldn't be enough hours to accommodate all his demands and restlessness. Well, that's what Umar is. He would do whatever he could. Share messages, voice his indignation, write, or protest against injustice. That sounds like the actions of an ideal citizen, a passionate youth. Like Shuddha mentioned, this mulaqat, the exercise that happens, it happens across a greased glass panel. A greased glass panel that separates us as we speak into our 1990s style phone receivers. The glass is only as transparent as the government's data on COVID deaths or unemployment. But through that murky pane, Umar tries to soak in as much information from the outside world as he can manage in a mulaqat. This is the only instance in which he feels that time just rushes past. He also inquires about my parents' health, about what is worrying me, about other friends, about small joys and big frustrations. But mainly, he just loves to talk. He talks like he is losing breath, like he is trying to pack in as many words per minute as possible. One can sense his anguish at having so many pent-up thoughts, but no one in jail to share with. He talks about what he is reading, and he has read a lot, given that's the only thing he has in abundance, that's time. And he does not have distracting devices with which to fritter it away. He once gave me a lecture on quote-unquote doom scrolling and laughed when I pointed out that he would be doing the same if he were not on the other side of the bus. As I was taking the long solitary walk back from the mulaqat room during my last visit to Umar, I suddenly realized that even 50 meters away, I was still wearing a smile, ear to ear. If someone can do that to you, even after nearly 4 years in jail and now 6, that is more powerful than the forces of lies and hate. I feel more relieved now that he has synced his clock I feel more relieved now that he has synced the clock of his mind to the slow motion time of jail. But I also hope that Umar's restlessness never ceases. Thanks.
Taking 1 minute more and read out one piece by Umar. This is an unpublished piece, which is part of the book. It's a letter to Rohit Vemula. So I'll just read out excerpts from it. Dear Rohit, on a cold starry night, I look out at the sky from my prison cell. I spot the brightest star and imagine it's you smiling at me from up there, asking me to stay strong. Whenever I feel tired or weak or lonely, I derive strength from the words you left us with. I wish we could talk. We never got a chance to talk with you in life, but here in solitude, looking at the brightest star in the night sky, it feels like I'm having that conversation from my cold, damp prison cell. It has been a decade, Rohit. I had no idea that just a month after your murder, I would be at the receiving end of my near-fatal accident of birth, that I would be at the receiving end of a malicious media trial that would brand me as anti-national just like they branded you, that they would send me along with others to jail under sedition, that two hooligans with a pistol would find their way to me baying for blood. I was 10 years younger then, and I said, borrowing from Shah Rukh Khan, that my name is Umar Khalid, but I am not a terrorist. But 10 years since, while I am writing to you from this, again from a prison cell, I still remain and under trial under the most draconian anti-terror law, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or UAPA. I wonder what was this unlawful act or terror act that I urged people to fight against hatred with love, or that I said we should face their lathis, sticks, with the constitution held in our hands, or that I took part in the historic and peaceful civil disobedience movement of Shaheen Bagh against the divisive and anti-Muslim amendments being made to our citizenship laws? Or was it my most immediate identity, my nearest possibility, that is my name?
Thank you to our three editors for a really very heartwarming and very touching introduction to the man that is called Umar Khalid. And if the argument is the book is an act of glorification, I think really the book is an act of humanization. You see Umar Khalid in so many details and in so many ways through the really wonderful extracts which our three friends read. And I think if you read the book, the one point which I drew away is there's a sense of a love of books which Umar has. And you get a sense of the number of books that he's read. His mother talks about him having read 250 books. His friends talk about him reading books. And outside there's a small poster of the books that Umar has read in jail and which he wants all of us to read as well. So there's a way in which his mind is alive, even if his body is in prison. And there's a certain kind of a power to that mind, which you'll realize when you read this book. So really, thank you so much for that really, as you all put it, for that fantastic gift of bringing Umar to all of us. And for, as you put it, expanding that circle of friendship. And Bangalore now has many friends, I think, of Umar based on the really marvelous way you communicated what Umar is and what Umar stands for. Without further ado, now I'll go on to the second part of the program, which is really the book discussion, which we want to have with our eminent panelists. And we have three panelists, all of whom really need no introduction, but I'll call them up one by one with a very brief introduction. Mr. Prakash Raj, of course, needs no introduction. He's well-known film director, producer, presenter, politician, speaks in numerous languages, and is known for really asking questions of the state. His hashtag #JustAsking is very popular, throughout the country, as someone who's courageously spoken truth to power. In his piece, he says something very, very beautiful about Umar. He says, and again, this is the point which I learned from the book. I learned that Mr. Prakash Raj has visited Umar's family and to communicate a solidarity with Umar and the struggle that Umar stood for. And as he puts it in his piece in this book, history will be witness to the fact that Umar Khalid and his parents are the real patriots. It is not just Umar Khalid, the person who is languishing in jail for the last 5 years. It is the right to freedom of expression of every citizen. It is the right to dignity and the constitution that guarantees them. It is not often that we have the privilege to be with someone who brings together both art and human rights as really a living constitutional practice. And your way of being, I hope, is something which is an inspiration to all of us. I invite you, please, Mr. Raj, to the stage. I will also, thank you, please. I will also invite Dr. Ramchandra Guha to the stage. Again, he needs no introduction. He's the much beloved Bangalore historian of Gandhi and the much sought after commentator on contemporary politics. But I think beyond his writings, which we know very, very well, he's also been a mentor to a range of younger people, always reading their books, providing blurbs, writing introductions. And in this context, he has read the dissertation of Dr. Umar Khalid. And there's an essay in the volume which is titled A Life Aborted, in which Professor Guha describes Umar's PhD work as one of the most accomplished doctoral dissertations by an Indian that I ever read. And we look forward to hearing more from you, Dr. Guha, on Umar's contribution. I'd also like to invite Dr. Janaki Nair, who's again a Bangalore-based, very well-known historian, author, researcher, newspaper columnist, and former professor at the JNU University. Again, for Bangaloreans, what is of great interest to us is a history of Bangalore titled The Promise of the Metropolis, Bangalore's 20th Century, as well as the Mysore Modern, Rethinking the Region Under Princely Rule. But Dr. Nair has the special privilege of knowing both Sharjeel Imam as well as Umar Khalid as a teacher. So, Janaki, without further ado, I invite you to the stage. With such an eminent panel, with which speaker do we begin? I thought of that, and I said we will begin with Dr. Janaki Nair, because she is the one who's had the privilege of teaching Umar and Sharjeel, to share some of her experiences on being a teacher of these two young men. Janaki, would you like to come to stage? Or?
Thank you so much, Arvind, for those very warm words of introduction. And thank you especially to those who have organized this event, to my fellow panelists, and to all those who have made it to this venue through great difficulty. We passed through 4 layers of police protection. So, you know, it is really an event which I hope that Umar will hear about and treasure, because I don't think they faced such opposition even in Delhi. I'm going to take this opportunity here to begin with a personal memory, especially since Anirban is here in person. They were a pair, they were twins. And what I remember most strongly about them was that in the first week of every month, they would pass my door, gently knock, and request a donation for the activities of the DSU. But there was one event they organized to which Umar invited me as a speaker. It was around 2013 or 14, I cannot remember the exact year, when this descriptor suffix, jihad, coded as dangerous Muslim, first surfaced, and of course today has proliferated as a disparaging epithet to not just love, that particular discussion was about love jihad, but land, flood, vote, the corporate world, and even, as we learned from this book, the deadly, and we all remember, the deadly coronavirus. And I think after today's event, we can even add book jihad. This is probably going to be added to the lexicon. It would be laughable if it had not become historical truth, if it were not so serious as to have led over the last 12 years, in particular to the vilification and dispossession, incarceration and death of Indian Muslims. And this book actually bears very important witness to this process. It's not, as somebody said in the introduction, just about Umar. It's about this moment. Somebody interviewed me outside just before I walked in, and I said to them, this book represents actually an archive of a very important historical moment in India today. And it goes well beyond just talking about Umar and his incarceration. There is a lot in the book with which I was already familiar. It was a powerful reminder, nevertheless, of how our justice system has begun to work, to be held without trial for so long and without being offered bail is, of course, to make the trial, to make the process itself the punishment, and to inflict a certain kind of social death on this person at this very young age, in the most productive years of his life. But it is why the book is an important testimony is, of course, that he has refused to die. He has actually been very creative and very productive, even behind bars. But he has also held up to us the mirror of what it is to be Muslim in India today, as do many of the pieces in this book. And above all, what are the new terms and truths that are being propagated and produced almost on an industrial scale. But I am going to use this opportunity given to me at this event to describe, to place in context, and you know how historians love to contextualize. I think those who are present here will bear me out. We love to provide the context, the greater context for any event or any micro event or any sort of process. And I would like to do that by talking about the university as a space for student politics, because let's recall, Umar was an MA student, an MPhil student, and a PhD student at JNU, which is a long period of time, almost 9 years or 10 years, I think, altogether. I would like to do this by focusing on the university that I knew best, which is JNU, where I was both a student and many decades later, a teacher. In its 50-year existence, it was a residential university with a difference. Both students and teachers played a larger than usual role in determining institutional life, and a genuine alternative to some aspects of life outside the university was imagined and sustained for half a century. I'm using the past tense because that's already in the past to some extent. For instance, female students had felt particularly safe and enjoyed greater freedom than on the streets of Delhi. JNU's GS Cash was hailed not just in India, but world over. But most importantly, the student movement introduced at least two momentous innovations. One was the deprivation points system begun in the 1970s, which gave weightages to students in order to redress certain socioeconomic backwardness on regional caste and class registers. And therefore, JNU was one location that became inclusive long before Mandal was even imagined. In 1994, women were also included in this deprivation point system. And I remember this particularly because one of the few non-academic conversations that I had with Umar was when he came to my room and told me about how he hoped for deprivation points to be extended to Muslims. And he argued quite ardently for that to be introduced on par with what women were enjoying. And I had a fierce argument with him because at that point I did not agree that there was any kind of discrimination against the recruitment of Muslims to the campus. And he pointed out that almost all the Muslims in the JNU campus were concentrated in the Arabic Studies department, and he would like, through a process of reservations, to be able to ensure that they have a presence in other departments as well. And I'm open to now re-looking at the vehemence with which I argued against that position at that time. Secondly, uniquely in India, the students conducted student union elections with its own election commission, which encouraged debate and discussion between candidates rather than the use of money and muscle, as in the neighboring Delhi University. Winning praise even from the Lingdo Commission, which said, and I quote, "Direct elections are held in a peaceful manner and are conducted entirely by the students, where election-related expenditure is kept to a relative minimum due to strict norms on the use of posters and election propaganda." This is really something to emulate, is what he said. But he also qualified it by saying it can only be emulated in small campuses like JNU. These were the innovations to which Umar Khalid and other students were heir as students of JNU. I cannot list all of them, but I will add just one last one. What Shudipto Kaviraj has called the philosophy of the night. After 9 p.m., the dining halls were transformed into spaces for argument, debate, and discussion, ranging from national to international events and processes. And I think Shudho's piece in this book also refers to one such event, am I correct, Shudho, that you have participated in yourself? And so many of us participated in the events, and they were usually organized by student organizations and by students themselves, Umar included. These discussions introduced young students to old theories and new ways of interrogating them. Some of these discussions were arcane, some insightful, but all were informative. And this is before the social media age. Some of these arguments, which carried on to the wee hours of the morning, were no less profound than the texts the students read in the classrooms. The initiative for these nocturnal debates always came from student groups like DSU and students like Umar Khalid. Why does this bear repetition today? Partly because it's been shut down. We no longer have in JNU the philosophy of the night. But I also want to show here some scholarly solidarity with Umar Khalid as the historian, both as a teacher and as a colleague. We need ways of urgently remembering or recalling a history which is in danger of being wiped away. We hear endlessly, not only about Naxalism and its violence, but nothing at all about an Indian Marxism that has been a profound influence on India and also revealed an alternative visionary path both before and after independence. When JNU, and my department in particular, the Center for Historical Studies, became the object of a sustained right-wing attack that began in 2016, the complaint usually was, and continues to be, that the left has monopolized or colonized these spaces. And now it was a redoubt that had to be captured by the right. That's the language that is used. You have to capture these spaces. I believe that we should frame the developments of the immediate post-independence decades in India quite differently. And here I would like to express some disagreement with the article, one of the articles that Umar has contributed to this book, which is called "JNU is being destroyed so the geo model can succeed." And I would like to make two corrections to what he argues in that book. First of all, that the privatization of higher education did not begin with this current regime. And in fact, this state which we live in, Karnataka, was the pioneer way back in 1953 when it allowed the establishment of Manipal University. Secondly, JNU was the focus of attention, and this is important. Why was JNU and the CHS in particular the focus of the attempt to dismantle and take over, as it were, the academic establishment? Because it was the model to emulate. It was an object of envy, and the goal of the takeover was to produce a right-wing version of the same university. That project has spectacularly failed over the last 12 years. JNU has been turned from a place of thinking into a place of worship. And, we always think of the term urban Naxal as something, denigrative and as insulting. But I would like to think now that perhaps it is actually a backhanded compliment, because it is actually admiring the capacity for the left to produce people who actually think. Believe me, it has really turned into a place of worship, and maybe in the question time I can explain why I say this. But let me carry on with this, because I don't want to use up too much of the time and deprive my fellow panelists of their time that is due to them. E.J. Hobsbawm, another well-known historian, wrote his book, The Age of Extremes, the short century between 1914 and 1991, which documented the failure of state socialism, that is to say Soviet-style communism. He was a communist throughout his life, and his life in some ways encompassed the very century that he was describing. But also he documents the failure of capitalism as during the famous 1929 depression, and of course nationalism in the short 20th century as he defined it and as he witnessed it. He posed an important challenge to those who might believe that the enchantment with left-wing ideologies and experiments was infantile or misplaced or indeed an illegitimate capture. He says something which is extremely relevant to the theft of history that is currently underway in India today. He was convinced, and I quote, "The question why communism attracted so many of the best men and women of my generation and what being communists meant to us had to be a central theme in the history of the 20th century." He foregrounds communism and Marxism as not only the forces that shaped the world in that critical century. Remember that the welfare state that is celebrated came into being post-war as a direct result of communism. But it also created a great many generations of imaginative people in the worlds of art and music, poetry and film, theater and dance, in addition to a wide range of political experiments whose goal was equality, driven by the passionate belief that no change was beyond their reach. I think Umar will agree with me when I say this has an extraordinary resonance for the ways in which we describe our 20th century. We know how rich that legacy has been in India. This is the legacy to which Umar Khalid, Sharjeel Imam, Devangana Kalita, Natasha Narwal, I'm only naming those who were my students, have been heir. In addition to being the most important oppositional voice in our political firmament until the 1980s, the left's contribution for at least 3 to 4 decades to the worlds of theater, writing, filmmaking, music, photography, think Sunil Jana decades before Sebastião Salgado, art, not to mention the worlds of social science and humanities, was out of all proportion to their numbers. So, against the selective stories that I believe, and I believe in the world of filmmaking, the word that is constantly used is files, against the selective files that are being propagated by the current regime, we are now obliged to defend the historical method and this precious historical memory. I want to make one more important point, and I want to make it today about another urgent need of our times. Let us reflect for a moment on the time at which we are assembled here. We had a small sample of what it is like to be under surveillance, to be checked, body checked, to be checked, verified, and so on and so forth, in just this half hour before we all assembled here. But we are also assembling at a moment when the world appears to have completely lost its moral bearings, when authoritarian and genocidal heads of state are making their own and other people's pay a very heavy price. We must begin by denying these majoritarian regimes their monopoly on historical wounds that denude all others of their very humanity. We must insist against all these genocidal wars that are pivoted on erasing the past, and they claim, as Israel does, that everything began on October 7, 2023, that never again must be never again for all. But we also know now that despite the terrible physical, material, and psychic damage that has been inflicted on Gaza, on Iran, and on Lebanon, We are seeing something new, the end of the American hegemon, an unexpected break on Israeli expansionism. In short, ways of being in this world that had been grievously underestimated. Now, I don't want people in this audience to go away mistaking me for lauding the Iranian regime. As a feminist, I cannot for one moment defend the violent suppression of the cry Jeen Jia Azadi, represented by Mahsa Amini, and the movement for democratic rights that happened in Iran. I am merely pointing to the capacity of that regime to halt the ambitions of two determined, armed, and dangerous world powers. Let us come to India, because that's what we are here to talk about. We have to invert the ways in which we have been thinking of our current predicament as one that calls for a focus on the protection of minority rights alone. And I believe that Umar would be on my side in this question. And by the way, I am not a contributor to this book. So maybe what I'm saying here is in some ways making up for my absence in the book. We need to think about and against the majoritarianism that has engulfed our lives. A majoritarianism that loves to hate and hates to love. A majoritarianism that bestows on me, as a result of the accident of birth, a privilege that I will refuse to exercise. And I fervently hope that this refusal will become a collective roar. A majoritarianism that is predicated on unitary principles that had been rejected at the moment of independence in favor of an ardently imagined Indian future of free and equal people empowered by that historic visionary document, the Constitution. We must reject any form of majoritarianism that excludes. We must refuse the impulse to become the mirror image of Pakistan. We must stand shoulder to shoulder with a different kind of majority. We can be loyal to an other Indian nation. We must support and extend what the Constitution has enabled, as many excellent books tell us, and I think Arvind may have a chance to talk about that when he talks, the building of a new majority. Let's build a new majority of those who have been oppressed, those who have been exploited, humiliated, dispossessed throughout our history, such as the very Adivasis about whom Umar Khalid has written. What, after all, did the anti-CAA protests and the women of Shaheen Bagh in particular teach us? It would be a mistake to view those protests that spontaneously rose throughout India through the narrow lens of a demand for minority rights. It taught us all over again the meaning of a people's republic, and I think that's what fascinated people like Umar and Sharjeel and all those who were, mesmerized by Shaheen Bagh. As someone who repeatedly visited that site over the 3 months of its existence, as someone who heard that Shaheen Baghs were proliferating in several parts of India, including in this sleepy city of Bangalore, I was overawed by its power, its creativity, and its resilience. Its mesmerizing effect was in teaching us that ordinary citizens can organize and sustain political protests without the aid of political parties. That was the biggest lesson of Shaheen Bagh, not the holding up of minority rights alone. It did so through art, song, poetry, theater, talks, and discussions that recalled the long heritage of mobilization via multiple languages throughout the Indian freedom movement, and indeed, as I mentioned slightly earlier, even in the efforts of the left in the decades between the 1930s and the 1980s. Such protests confuse and frustrate the moral vision of the ethno-nationalist majoritarians. The new India that must be built, as Partha Chatterjee has put it, must be nothing less than a national people's federation. The emphasis must be on a federation that recovers and protects once more the region, its multiplicity of languages, cultural and political forms, knowledge systems, as well as the region's varied demands and aspirations. This is especially true as we are witnessing, as we speak here today, what is being attempted in Bengal. Nothing less than the greatest electoral coup in post-independence India. Now, I'm so glad that I'm sharing a stage with Ram Guha, because he is a well-known and entrenched optimist, and I am a well-known pessimist. At the end of his majestic survey of post-independence Indian history, he concludes on, at least the older version of the book, Ram, correct me if I'm wrong, he concludes on a very positive note about the virtue of voting and the meanings that it has for Indian democracy. But we know that the electoral system has been completely debased in our times. And I know that he has written a fresh conclusion to the latest version of your book. Am I correct? So, but you know, we do stand on two sides of the spectrum as far as how we see things happening in this country. Let me quote Chatterjee here. National security, and remember that it is in the name of national security that people like Umar Khalid and Sharjeel Imam have been forced to spend years in jail and have also been denied their bail repeatedly. National security, says Parthu Chatterjee, must mean, above all, the life and freedom of the people. In other words, the people cannot be expected to give up their freedoms for the sake of the health of the state. That is because the people have given birth to the state and not the state to the people. We must remember this. We need to remind ourselves of this and the kinds of deep commitments that the young people like Umar Khalid have had to this idea of a national people's federation. I might be putting words in his mouth, but I think he will forgive me for that. As historians, as citizens of this great Indian Republic, we must urgently remember, recall, and recreate these pasts. As historians, our work is cut out for us. We must begin the enormous task of historical literacy that will encourage the young who are for sure are quite unfamiliar with these pasts to build or rebuild the Republic as it was imagined and forged in the decades since Indian independence, and which the Indian people have, over the decades, interpreted to their democratic advantage, as did the women of Shaheen Bagh. I don't entertain any illusions about the emancipatory potential of history, that is history with a capital H, as the story of our past, which may be exhausted capital today, especially since it has been debased by being associated or annexed to a project of majoritarian pride and vituperative exclusion. My task is far more modest. We must show that there were and are many ways of being Indian that do not conform to the hate-filled ethno-nationalism that pervades and suffuses our public life today. Only enlivening that historical memory and insisting on and reclaiming the federal structure of our republic, which my former teacher at JNU, Professor Madhavan Palat, has described as a nation of nations. We are a nation of nations. We have so many languages, so many ethnicities, so many cultures, so many religions, and so much by way of political experimentation as well to sustain, support, and nurture. We have to reclaim that. Only that will give us the power to withstand the majoritarian impulse that threatens to bulldoze this brilliant achievement that is India and its democratic power. Let the terrible price that people like Umar Khalid and Sharjeel Imam are paying just for exercising their democratic rights and therefore defending ours, let's not forget that, while they remain in jail, we remain free to be able to have events like this and to be able to sustain the movement towards a true democracy. Let the terrible price that they are paying not be in vain. So I want to repeat what Shidho said. Go out, buy, I won't say steal, because I'm a teacher, but I'll say download, he didn't say that, borrow, and above all, commit the thought crime of reading this book. That's a word that I had. Thank you.
Uh, before I begin, Arvind, no one introduced Arvind. So I best say a little bit. I first knew him as a young student at NLSUI. In later incarnations, he has been the moving spirit of the Alternative Law Forum, currently of a moving spirit of the People's Union for Civil Liberties Karnataka chapter, currently also the General Secretary or some such title of the RBA and MS and Sabha, which is a complementary COMPLE, complementary alternative addition to BIC, so patronized Sabha as well. And finally, he is also the moving spirit of a radical dissenting running club that meets every Sunday for dosa at Airlines Hotel. And finally, he is the moving spirit of today's event. It would not have happened without Arvind. And it's not coordinating with the editors and putting all of this together, but the last 48 hours coordinating with the goons on one side and the police on the other. With a little help from Prakash, I must admit. There are a couple of calls Prakash made, may have smoothed our path, but I thought since no one introduced Arvind, I should begin with that. I'd like to begin my formal remarks by congratulating the editors in the book. They have assembled a rich and diverse range of contributors. Apart from Umar Khalid himself, his writings constitute about 1/4 of the book, but the other pieces are by journalists, activists, scholars, script writers, legal scholars, poets, historians, poets. They are variously young, old, and middle-aged, men and women, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, atheist, dare I say, Gandhian, Ambedkarite, Marxist, feminist, and a few other things, and also writing in English and in Hindi, and very different genres. So there's the essay, there's the memoir, there's the poem, there's the letter, there's the cartoon, and the whole body of contributions and contributors has been very carefully curated by the editors. They've provided an excellent introduction to the book as a whole and shorter introductions to sections. Now, this is, it's a work of enormous complexity and judgment and balance. Editing a volume of this kind. It's easier to write your own book than to do this. And of course, it's a selfless service to, to the cause that all of us have come here to endorse. Now, Janaki taught Umar. Prakash has met Umar. I have never met Umar Khalid. I have read about him, of course, for many years, and more recently read something by him that is not in this book. And that is, what I have read is his 300-page doctoral thesis. And I read it because it was on a research theme that has occupied me my whole working life, the social and environmental history of Adivasis and peasant communities. And my short piece in this volume describes the thesis and its merits, Umar Khalid's doctoral thesis. But what I'm going to talk to you today really draws on the other and much more substantial pieces of this volume. And to my mind, as I was reading them and trying to make sense of them and trying to put together something meaningful and coherent to say to you today, I thought I would argue that, I'll be very interested to know the editor's responses to this, that taken as a whole, and if you read them closely and carefully, they reveal, or at least they reveal to me, at least 8 different Umar Khalids. First, Umar Khalid as a thinker and as a writer, displaying a keen understanding of Indian history, society, and politics. His letters and his essays contain sharp analysis of the fault lines of caste, class, religion, gender, and region. So the many Indias that Janaki talked about are reflected in what Umar writes. So they are the work of a brilliant and curious mind, but also a fine stylist who eschews the academic jargon that, is quite common among scholars and historians nowadays, and is someone he wants to write for his fellow citizens, not just for his fellow scholars. So first, we have Umar Khalid, the thinker and writer. Second, and quite very interestingly, in fact, this is one of the most interesting aspects of the book, though maybe it's a minor aspect, to me it was revealing. The second Umar Khalid revealed here is a critic and judge of other writers. And there are two pieces I'd like to draw your attention to. One is an assessment of the great pioneering historian Ranjit Guha, no relation of mine, the founder of the Subaltern Studies School. And Umar from jail is writing about what Ranjit Guha meant to him after Ranjit Guha died. And the second is a book review he wrote of a book I'd recommend to everyone here. After you buy Umar Khalid and His World, go to one of our wonderful bookshops on Church Street or elsewhere and buy this other book. It's a book called The Many Lives of Sayyida X by a very brave and fine young writer in Delhi called Neha Dikshit. And it's a book about the travails of a working class family, Muslim working class family in post-liberalization India. And here is Umar Khalid writing an appreciation of a historian and of a journalist. So that's the second Umar Khalid, a critic who assesses other writers and other thinkers. The third Umar Khalid is that of a democratically minded citizen who has a passionate commitment to freedom and justice. The fourth Umar Khalid I find in this book is Umar Khalid as a prisoner. And I think some of the excerpts that have been read out earlier showed this. His detailed but always unsentimental descriptions of the arduous conditions of prison life, the heat, the awful facilities, and not least the fear and suffering of his fellow prisoners during the COVID pandemic. So that's the fourth Umar Khalid as a prisoner. The fifth Umar Khalid, represented in this book, is an individual of enormous courage and unquenchable spirit and zest for life. And as an illustration from this, I'm going to read a short description of the positive sides of jail life, which are contained in a letter he wrote to a friend in September 1922. So this is what he's writing. I mean, in other excerpts, you hear about the heat, the insanitary facilities, the COVID pandemic, the brutality, the loneliness, the insecurity. And here he says, I quote, "For all its hardships, jail has also led to several positive, in quotes, changes in my life. I have quit smoking. For 2 years, I have lived without a mobile phone, which means I am over that other drug too, social media. I came here with a concentration span of a tweet. But now I read several novels each month. And finally, after several years of trying, my sleep cycle is back in place. My mother would be glad to hear this." So that's the unquenchable spirit. The sixth Umar Khalid reflected in this book is as a friend and family man, loving, kind, witty, and with a sense of mischief. The seventh Umar Khalid represented in this book is a victim, though I know he may not like the word victim, maybe I'll call it a symbol or metaphor of the India we live in, an authoritarian and majoritarian India with compromised and corrupt institutions. Umar is persecuted because he's young, independent-minded, and Muslim. And finally, the last Umar Khalid I find here is a symbol of the better, nobler India we all here wish to see being born or perhaps reborn. Now, those are the 8 facets of Umar Khalid I found here. Some of you may find yet others. I'd like to end on a personal note. When I was young, I had icons, heroes and heroines I looked up to, whom I knew personally, not distant figures, like scholars whom I had read and never met and so on, or Mahatma Gandhi or B.R. Ambedkar, whom I merely read about. but people I actually met. And I'll just name a few. One was the great Chipko leader Chandi Prasad Bhatt, who a pioneer of grassroots environmentalism, an exemplary social worker, who is in his 90s and still with us. His autobiography bears the translation in English. It was originally written in Hindi. The English translation is Gentle Resistance, which I think Umar would certainly like the title. I hope, please, one of you send it to him to read in jail next time. So Chandi Prasad Bhatt, whom I met as a young doctoral scholar while writing my dissertation on forests and peasants in the Himalaya. A second icon of mine was someone just a little older than me, who died tragically young in his early 40s. He was the moving spirit of the People's Union for Democratic Rights. A man called C.V. Subbarao, someone of extraordinary intelligence, ability, charisma. He'd been a political prisoner. He was jailed during the emergency. He did his MA from jail. And he was brought for his Viva examination in handcuffs. And actually he got a gold medal from jail in his MA. Then he came after that, he came from Andhra and taught in Delhi University. And and he wrote himself out of the civil liberties movement. You will not see his name anywhere. Although, when he died, there was a meeting in Delhi where Govinda Mukherjee, the well-known lawyer, said, in the history of the civil liberties movement in India, three names will be paramount: Jawaharlal Nehru, Justice Tarkunde, and C.V. Subbarao. Now, so he was a second icon of mine, and the memory of what he meant to me, the memory of what Chandi Prasadji has meant to me, have sustained me in my work and writing. But there was a third I would like to recall here as we discuss Umar Khalid and his world, and that's the Bengali writer Mahashweta Devi, whom I didn't know as well as I knew Chandi Prasad Bhatt or C.V. Subbarao, but we had several interactions, partly because of her work on Adivasis. And one conversation with her, which has left a deep imprint on my mind, and which I'd like to recall for you today, happened in March 2002. The Gujarat riots had just broken out, and she called me in Bangalore, and she said, I have just written a letter to the President of India, urging him to act to set the constitutional machinery, in process because of all that's been happening in Gujarat. And she described what she had heard about Gujarat. She said it was important for writers to intervene. That is why she had written to the President. The President then was K.R. Narayanan, a rare president of principle and intelligence. And then she said, you have to convince U.R. Ananthamurthy, who was the preeminent Kannada writer of the day, living in Bangalore. You have to draft a letter for him, which he will sign and send to the President. And we were discussing this, and as Mahashweta was then in her 70s, and a diabetic, and quite infirm. And as our conversation ended, and I said I will do what she had asked me to do, she muttered a sentence twice. First to herself. And it was a sentence in impeccable Hindustani in a Bengali accent. And this is what she said. Moi moidan nahi chodungi. Moi moidan nahi chodungi. And I think that is the kind of you could say talisman that I'd like to leave you with today.
Hi, good evening everyone. I think we are running out of time. And there's a Q&A. So you've heard me enough on this, and wonderful to hear you all, and thank you so much. As we are sitting here, the supreme leader of the regime has just given a statement in the last election today. Give me your vote, I'll give you freedom. Well, that's it, and I'll just say a line or two, because I'll leave it for the Q&A. I'm a very positive guy, and I'm here because Umar is standing and fighting for all of us. I'm here, I don't think Umar is in jail. Umar is in a prison. He is there to ensure that his country doesn't become a prison. I think for people like For wonderful people like Umar, jailing is like fermentation. He is brewing. Yeah, and I expect like all the political leaders in this world, when they come out, what they speak is richer, deeper. And I'm a Umar will come with that thought. And I'll thanking you all again for coming with all and standing with this and continuing this conversation. I'll let you have some questions, Q&A with the learned people here. Better.
I'll take one from there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to all our speakers. I think it was really three powerful presentations in terms of three different perspectives which we got. From Dr. Janaki Nair, we got the sense of a personal perspective. You got a sense of also teacherly disagreement, which continues with Umar, even as we speak. And that's really wonderful to see. From Dr. Guha, of course, we got this really wonderful frame of the 7 Umars, and which is the Umar which we want to take forward in our inspiration. And Mr. Raj, as ever, thank you so much for your solidarity and for your support in this continuing struggle. As you said, we have very little time, and I'm sure you all have lots of questions for our panelists. So maybe we'll take a couple of questions immediately.
After that.
Yeah, I did not want to be the first one asking a question, but here we are. So my question is from a place of a lot of personal anguish as well as rising hope. And I think I will speak for a lot of people, especially those of us who were students at the time of 2020, 2021, 2019, about the fact that for me, the CA and RC protests and Shaheen Bagh was the first time being exposed to politics at such a large scale. And it was a time of, quoting words of Faiz Ahmed Faiz and a lot of these figures that from the history of our country where basically the hope and fireness was rising. And then thank you. So I was there for the Delhi riots personally, and I think that was the time where these signs of hope were changed to smell of burning flesh, charred bodies in drains, and, ashed up buildings. And for a lot of us, that was a huge change in the way we understood our nation.
Yeah.
But where I'm going towards is that for many years I felt towards this sense of nihilism. But of late, and especially this year, there have been rising instances of what I'm seeing as allyship, from all the Muhammad Deepaks to all the people who are standing up to mobs and crying about, you don't get to say this, what are you doing?
Thank you. I think we got your question.
My question is about allyships.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe we'll get time for one last question, very sharp and quick question. We'll give our panelists a chance to respond.
So I see that the original history is constantly being rewritten, like the young. Can you hear me? Oh. Yeah. I keep hearing that the original history is being rewritten for the younger generation who's coming ahead of us. How do you ensure that all of us get to know the actual history and not the version of it which is being rewritten by the people in power?
I think maybe one last question and we'll. Yeah. No time.
If the public universities are dead, then where do we go?
Okay, thank you.
Are we done? We have more.
These are very important but rather large questions, and they would require, a long time to answer, but let me answer the question regarding history first, because this is, I'm sensing here a certain kind of anxiety about placing our past in the hands of those who are actively erasing parts of it. The responsibility that is bearing down on people like us to actually not just remember, but to communicate. I called for historical literacy. I would say that this is a need for building a historical temper. I've been talking about this in many different places of late. We have in our directive principles the command that we should actually develop a scientific temper, but I would like that to include as well a historical temper. We have to teach people the ways of understanding our past that are not based on WhatsApp forwards. And this means learning the historical method. It means effort, and it means reading, and it means engaging, all of which, some of us are prepared to do. I think we are doing it in our own ways, through our writings, through our public writings, but also with our oral engagements of this kind. So we are doing our best to fill that gap, as it were. But it is something that is existing outside the university frame. So I'll come to this question of, if the public university is dying, where do we go? I don't have an answer to this, because it is true that the kinds of ways in which the public university nurtured certain ways of thinking is simply not happening in spaces within university spaces, and especially certainly not within private university spaces, on the same scale and to the same degree of inclusion that the public university actually involved. So it is doubling up the kind of pressure and burden on people like us to build spaces for engagement outside university walls. That would be my response, and I think we're doing a bit of that as well.
I'll just make one remark, and then I'd like, with the organizer's permission, to let Arvind say a few things. Because particularly from the perspective of someone who works in civil liberties, who's a legal scholar, who's written a very good book on the Constitution and the abuses of the constitutional process, and he hasn't really spoken. So I'll just make one remark, and that's linked to the CAA protest. Now, the major countrywide protest took place on the 19th of December 2019. And I'd like to remind all of you, and some of you may not even know why that date was chosen. That date was chosen because on the 19th, for two reasons. The first reason was that on the 19th of December 1927, two revolutionaries, Ram Prasad Bismil and Ashfaqullah Khan, one Hindu and one Muslim, were executed by the colonial state. The second reason was on the same day, 19th of December 1947, 20 years later, Mahatma Gandhi went on a Padayatra to the Muslim villages of what is now Haryana and urged them not to migrate to Pakistan, saying they would be given equal rights here. So what that date did, was to unite the revolutionaries' history with the Satyagraha history. Two currents in our freedom struggle that had been bitterly opposed and polemicized against one another. Later on, when the protest started in Delhi, on that same day in Delhi, and young students were active, including in Jamia, including Shaheen Bagh, including other places, I saw young protesters holding up portraits of Gandhi and Ambedkar together. Again, contrary to the polarization, in my view, poisonous posthumous polarization that both sides, Gandhi and Ambedkarites, had started. So what are the lessons of that protest? The young man who answered. Today, as we go forward, we know there are many people we can bring on our side. Another example of this highly destructive and damaging opposition is Nehru versus Patel. Nehru and Patel together built India, with many others. They were not rivals. So I think we have to know who are on our side and not start these, what Freud may have called the narcissism of minor differences. Gandhi versus Ambedkar, Patel versus Nehru, Bhagat Singh versus Gandhi, when we have this awful enemy on the other side, to fight whom we need all these other people and their, and their legacies and their thoughts. But so I thought, at least as someone who's both a historian and as a citizen, who studied Bhagat Singh and Gandhi and Ambedkar and Bose and everyone else, I thought this is the kind of you could say, moral of what we face today. But I'd really like Arvind to say a few things.
With so much of pressure now, I better say something. I just have maybe one thought to share, maybe picking up some of the comments by young friends, and maybe the reason why all of you are here. And all of you are here to, in a sense, to express a sense of solidarity with the struggle of Umar Khalid. All of you here to express a certain kind of an opposition to certain kind of a totalitarianism which is underway. So I just want to reference one book, actually, Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism. And there's a marvelous section in the end where she talks about 3 psychological states. She talks about isolation, loneliness, and solitude. And she defines the question of isolation as the sense that we're all in our own separate worlds, and the world can't change because I'm in a different world, you're in a different place, and there's no way we come together. So she says the imperative of challenging totalitarianism is to break isolation. That we start talking to each other. Once we start talking to each other, alliances form. Once alliances form, change becomes possible. So this gathering here is an example of breaking that sense of an isolation, the feeling that we can't act, we can't do anything together. The second point she makes is that how do we challenge the question of loneliness? She says loneliness is the disease of the 20th century, and I think it's the disease of the 21st century as well. So the idea that you're profoundly disconnected from the world in which you inhabit, and how do you re-establish your connection with the world? Again, the disavowal of social media, Umar's point, getting back to a connection with people becomes a very important way to combat the sense of loneliness. And thirdly, to cultivate a spirit of solitude. Going back to the book is really about how do you cultivate that question of relationship with yourself. Even in the middle of a crowd, in the middle of nobody, you have that ability to relate to yourself and ability therefore to relate to the world. So I think the imperative today we have is how do we break that sense of isolation? How do we cultivate a spirit of solitude? And how do we challenge loneliness? I'll leave it at that with one last word of maybe if we have time for Rohini to come in with a thank you. You may have one last word.
Because there was something I forgot to do, and that was to read the last 2 lines of this marvelous poem written by Parnita Shetty, which is included in this book. So I want to add to Ram's long list of the number of Umar Khalids that he has seen in this book, which I completely agree with, but he left out one, and I'm going to add that. I was quite impressed to see the extent to which he cited poetry in his writing. That was a side of Umar that I did not know. And it was wonderful to see his use of poetry in his writing, many different types of poets. But here are the kinds of people whose lives he touched in such distant corners of India. Parnita Shetty is in Bangalore, as you know, Bangalore University. And this poem is called For Umar Khalid. I'm not going to read the whole poem, but just as a word of hope, especially to our young people, she says in the last 2 lines, he is stoking the embers of love in the winter of hate.
Thank you so much for the wonderful discussion, and most importantly, thank you for bringing this book to us and sharing this with Bangalore. Yeah, there's a lot to say, and I'm going to say a quick thank you to Bananjo. I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Miss Lahiri, and Shutabhadro. Sankaptan, I know I'm butchering all of your names. But, yeah, and Anirban Bhattacharya. So thank you so much for doing this, because it's the need of the hour, and all of us are here because, yeah, like Mr. Raj said, Umar is in prison because, yeah, we need to, so that the rest of us won't be in prison. And yeah, we can enjoy our freedom and know what freedom means. And yeah, so this was a really sobering event, and I know all of us had to jump through security to get here. So that itself is telling. And thank you so much for all of your commitment, and thank you so much, Dr. Guha, for being here, and sharing your thoughts on the book, and Professor Janaki Nair for also giving your thoughts on the book and also your perspective of Umar as your student. And yeah, so I think that's Thank you so much.
We'd just like to end by giving all our participants and including a copy to Umar. This is a copy of the Constitution of India made by one of our friends. And it's done in two colors. It's done in blue, symbolizing, of course, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and done in khadi, symbolizing Gandhi, which will gladden Ram's heart. So it's different from the red which we see all over the place. So I just give it to all our colleagues, and thank you so much for being here.